A millionaire took his mistress home right after his wife's funeral. The next day, when the lawyer read the will, he collapsed at what she had done with the fortune. The funeral home in Fairfield, Connecticut, was packed with mourners paying their last respects to Martha Sterling. As rain pattered against the stained glass windows, soft sobs echoed through the chapel. Martha's coffin was surrounded by white roses, her favorite flowers, which she used to grow in her garden behind the Sterling mansion. But upstairs, in the funeral home's private room, Richard Sterling, the 70-year-old real estate mogul, wasn't grieving. Instead, he was texting on his phone, a slight smile playing on his lips. Betty Wilson, the Sterling's housekeeper of 40 years, watched in disbelief as he checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. "Mr. Sterling," Betty whispered, her voice trembling. "People are waiting to start the service." Richard barely looked up. "5 more minutes. We're waiting for someone." That someone turned out to be Sophia Bennett, a striking 45-year-old marketing executive. She walked into the funeral wearing a tight black dress and, to everyone's shock, Martha's signature pearl necklace, the one she had worn every day for the past 45 years. The pearls weren't just jewelry. They were a symbol of Martha and Richard's love story, given to her the day they bought their first real estate office. Now they gleamed around another woman's neck, just days after Martha's death. "Isn't the service beautiful?" Sophia whispered to Richard, loud enough for nearby mourners to hear. "Though the flowers are a bit old-fashioned. We should hire a modern decorator for the mansion." Betty's hands clenched into fists as she watched Richard nod in agreement. Her mind flashed back to just last week, when Martha was still alive, tending to those same white roses despite her weakness from chemotherapy. The whispers started immediately. "Is that her pearl necklace? He brought his mistress to the funeral? How dare they?" But the real shock came after the service. While mourners were still wiping their tears, Richard announced he was hosting an intimate gathering at the Sterling mansion. When the first guests arrived, they found Sophia already there, in Martha's closet. "These old dresses need to go," Sophia declared, throwing Martha's carefully preserved clothes into boxes. "This mansion needs a younger woman's touch." Betty stood frozen in the doorway, watching as Sophia pulled out Martha's photo albums. "We don't need these anymore," Sophia said, dropping them into a trash bag. "The past is the past." That's when Betty saw it. Martha's prized silver frame holding her wedding photo, cracked and discarded among the trash. As she rescued it, a sealed envelope fell from behind the frame. On it, in Martha's elegant handwriting, were the words, "To be opened upon my death, to my true love." Betty quickly hid the letter in her apron pocket. Her hands trembling, she watched as Sophia not only paraded around in Martha's pearls, but also slipped Martha's wedding ring onto her finger. A ring that shouldn't have been available, as Martha had been buried with it. "Richard, darling," Sophia called out, "I found Martha's wedding ring in her jewelry box. You must have switched it before the burial. How thoughtful of you to save it for me." Richard beamed at his mistress. "Everything that was Martha's is yours now, my dear. Tomorrow, we'll meet with the lawyers to read the will, and then we can start our new life together." What Richard didn't know was that in Betty's pocket, Martha's letter contained much more than just words. And tomorrow, at the reading of the will, Richard Sterling's world would crumble in ways he never imagined. As the day drew to a close, Betty watched Sophia measuring the master bedroom windows for new curtains. "These heavy drapes are so depressing," Sophia complained. "This whole place needs a complete makeover." Thunder cracked outside, and for a moment, Betty could have sworn she saw Martha's reflection in the bedroom mirror, her face bearing that knowing smile she always had when she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Martha might have been gone, but Betty knew one thing for certain: tomorrow would change everything. The seeds of revenge had been planted long ago, and they were about to bloom in ways that would shake the foundations of the Sterling Empire. Fairfield, Connecticut, 1975. Martha Peterson walked into the tiny real estate office, carrying a brown envelope. She found Richard Sterling sitting at his desk, head in his hands. Eviction notices and past due bills covered his desk. "I can't pay you this week's salary," Richard said without looking up. "The bank's foreclosing on the office. It's over." Martha sat down across from him. Actually, I have something that might help. She opened the envelope and pulled out a check. My grandmother left me an inheritance. It's not much, but it's enough to save the office and start fresh. Richard's eyes widened. Martha, I can't take your money. It's not a gift. It's an investment. I've watched you work, Richard. You're a brilliant salesman, but you need someone to handle the books. She smiled. Someone like me. Richard grabbed her hands. If you do this, I promise we'll be partners in everything. I'll never let you down. That promise lasted exactly 45 years. 2 months and 3 days. In the months before her death, Martha sat in her home office, staring at old photographs. She picked up one from their wedding day, Richard placing his grandmother's pearls around her neck. With these pearls, I promise to love you forever, he had said. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Sterling, Professor Thompson is here. Jennifer Thompson walked in, carrying a laptop. At 62, she commanded attention with her confident stride. Martha quickly hid the photos. Thank you for meeting privately, Martha said. Did you bring the documents I asked for? Jennifer nodded, pulling out a stack of papers. Everything about digital entrepreneurship for seniors. But Martha, there's something you should know, she hesitated. About Richard and me. Martha held up her hand. I know, Jennifer, you were engaged to Richard in college. He left you for me. Jennifer's jaw dropped. You knew? I found his old letters to you last month, the same day I found his emails to Sophia. Martha's voice remained steady. That's why I chose you for this project. You understand what he's capable of. Jennifer sat down. All these years, I thought you were the reason he left me. But now he's doing the same thing to me that he did to you. Only this time. Martha opened her laptop, revealing spreadsheets of property transactions and offshore accounts. This time, he's going to learn that karma takes compound interest. Martha clicked through documents showing millions in questionable transactions. Richard thinks he built this empire, but I'm the one who kept the books. Every shortcut, every dirty deal, every bit of creative accounting, I documented it all. Jennifer leaned forward. What are you planning? A foundation, not just any foundation. A revolution. We'll teach senior women to build online businesses. But first, Martha pulled out more documents. I need to move some assets before Richard notices. He'll fight the will, Jennifer warned. Martha smiled. Let him try. I've spent 45 years learning how Richard thinks. I know exactly what he'll do. She picked up a photo of Richard and Sophia at a hotel, just like I knew about them long before he thought I did. The famous Martha Sterling, always 3 steps ahead, Jennifer said. But why show me all this? Martha's eyes filled with tears. Because I need someone who understands both business and betrayal. The foundation needs to succeed. These women need to succeed. Jennifer took Martha's hand. We won't let you down. As Jennifer left, Martha opened her safe and removed a USB drive. On it was every transaction, every lie, every betrayal Richard had committed over 4 decades. Next to it lay a stack of property deeds, all recently transferred to Martha's private trust. Oh, Richard, she whispered, touching her pearls. You taught me everything about real estate, but you forgot the first rule. She looked at the empire she had quietly taken control of. Location isn't everything. Timing is. Tomorrow, Richard would bring Sophia home after the funeral, but Martha had already ensured that home had a very different meaning than he thought. Mrs. Sterling, you might want to sit down for this. Dr. Roberts held the test results in his hands. The hospital room felt smaller than usual. Martha sat straight in her chair. How long? 6 months, maybe 8 with aggressive treatment. Martha nodded, her face composed. And without treatment? 3 months at most. She opened her calendar app. That's all I need. On her way home, Martha stopped at the office to pick up some files. The building was empty. Everyone had left for the day. As she sat at her computer to check one last email, a notification popped up. Richard had forgotten to log out of his account again. The first email she saw was from Sophia. Can't wait until she's gone. I've already picked out new furniture for our bedroom. Martha clicked through more messages. There were photos of Richard and Sophia in Hawaii during the week he'd claimed to be at a real estate convention. Hotel receipts. Plans for their future together. Our time is coming, Richard had written. The old lady won't last much longer. Martha's hands didn't shake as she forwarded everything to her private email. Then she noticed a video attachment. She pressed play. Richard's face filled the screen. He was in their bedroom with Sophia. "Once Martha's gone, everything in this house is yours," he promised, kissing Sophia. "I never loved her like I love you." A knock at the door made Martha quickly close the laptop. Grace Wilson, a nurse in her 60s, stood in the doorway. "Mrs. Sterling, your husband's been looking for you. He's worried about your doctor's appointment." Martha smiled. "Of course he is." She gathered her things, then paused. "Grace, could you help me with something?" Over the next week, Martha met with Grace regularly, supposedly for preliminary treatment consultations. But their real conversations had nothing to do with cancer. "You're sure about this?" Grace asked, looking at the old photo Martha had handed her. "Positive. Richard doesn't know, does he, about the baby?" Grace's face paled. "How did you?" "I found the letters, Grace, from 1982. Richard got you pregnant during our first year of marriage, then paid you to disappear." Grace sank into a chair. "I never cashed his check. I raised Tommy on my own." The same Tommy who donated his kidney to Richard 15 years ago. Martha reached for Grace's hand. "Does Richard know his kidney came from his own son?" "No." Grace wiped a tear. "Tommy doesn't know either. He thinks he donated to a stranger." Martha nodded. "I need your help, Grace. Not just as a nurse, as someone else Richard betrayed." As Martha outlined her plan, Grace's eyes widened. "It's brilliant. But why tell me all this?" "Because in 6 months, Richard will need someone to explain exactly why he lost everything." Martha handed Grace a sealed envelope. "And you'll be there to tell him." That evening, Martha attended her first entrepreneurship class. Jennifer was teaching senior women how to start online businesses. As Martha watched these women learn about websites and social media, her plan crystallized. At home, Richard was waiting. "Where were you?" "I was worried sick." "At therapy," Martha lied. "Doctor's orders." Richard hugged her. "Whatever you need, darling, I'm here for you." Martha hugged him back, feeling the weight of the USB drive in her pocket. "I know you are, dear. Right until the end." That night, Martha wrote in her diary, "Richard thinks he's waiting for me to die, but I'm not his victim. I'm his karma, and karma comes with compound interest." She looked at the photo of Grace's son, Richard's unknown kidney donor, and smiled. Some secrets were worth dying with. Others were worth saving for exactly the right moment. Tomorrow, she would start selling properties. Next week, she would transfer funds. And in 6 months, she would teach Richard that his greatest mistake wasn't betraying her. It was underestimating her. The chemotherapy ward at Fairfield Memorial buzzed with quiet conversation. Martha sat in her usual chair, watching as 2 other women worked on craft projects during their treatments. Eleanor Martinez, 70, was showing everyone pictures of her grandchildren while sharing homemade cookies. Patricia Wong, 66, knitted caps for other cancer patients, her needles clicking softly. "Martha, you must try these cookies," Eleanor insisted. "My secret recipe. Been in the family for generations." "They're amazing," Martha said, genuinely impressed. "You could sell these." Eleanor sighed. "My grandson keeps saying I should start a business, but at my age, who'd buy from an old lady?" Patricia looked up from her knitting. "Same reason I don't sell my caps. No one takes us seriously anymore." Martha was about to respond when commotion erupted in the hallway. "I don't care who you are. You can't just change patient appointments." It was Grace confronting a young woman. "Do you know who my mother is? Who my future father is?" The girl waved a phone. "Richard Sterling is about to marry my mom, so you better get used to taking orders from me." Martha sat up straighter. This must be Ashley, Sophia's daughter. Later that afternoon, Martha returned home to find Ashley in her study, rifling through her desk. "Can I help you?" Martha asked. Ashley jumped. "Mom said I could look around. This will be her office soon anyway." "I see." Martha noticed her photo albums scattered on the floor. "Those were private." "We're private. Mom says everything here will be ours soon." Ashley picked up a photo. "Who's this man with Dad? I mean Richard?" Martha took the photo. It showed Richard with James Bennett, Sophia's father from 20 years ago. Just an old business partner. "Mom never talks about my grandfather," Ashley said, suddenly interested. "She says he abandoned her." "Is that what she told you?" Martha sat down. "Your grandfather didn't abandon anyone. Richard ruined him." Ashley froze. What? James Bennett was Richard's partner. They built housing developments together. But when James discovered Richard was cutting corners on safety, he threatened to report it. Martha opened her desk drawer. Instead, Richard framed him for fraud. James lost everything. You're lying, Ashley said, but her voice wavered. Am I? Ask your mother why she really wants to marry Richard. Ask her about Project Sunrise from 2003. Before Ashley could respond, Sophia burst into the study. Ashley, what are you doing talking to her? Mom, who was Grandpa James? Sophia's face paled. That's none of your business. Come on, we're leaving. Actually, Martha said, I think it is her business, just like the real reason you're marrying Richard. Sophia grabbed Ashley's arm. We're done here. After they left, Martha's phone rang. It was Catherine Lewis, her old college roommate. Martha, I found those recordings you asked about, the ones from Richard's office. You still have them? All of them, including the conversation where he planned James Bennett's downfall. Catherine paused. But there's more. I found something about Sophia. She's been recording Richard too. Martha smiled. Of course she has. She's her father's daughter. Martha, these recordings, they could ruin everyone. That's the point, Catherine. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better. That evening, Martha met Eleanor and Patricia at a coffee shop. A business course? Eleanor asked skeptically. At our age? Why not? Martha showed them Jennifer's course outline. We have experience, skills, stories to tell. Why shouldn't we profit from them? Patricia touched one of her knitted caps. You really think people would buy these? I know they would. Martha pulled out her laptop. Let me show you something. As she explained Jennifer's digital entrepreneurship program, Martha watched their eyes light up. These women had spent decades being underestimated, just like her. Her phone buzzed, a text from Grace. Ashley was asking about her grandfather at the hospital today. She seems shaken. Martha replied, The truth has a way of shaking things up. Another message popped up from Betty. Mrs. Sterling, Ashley's been crying in her car outside the mansion for an hour. Should I check on her? No, Martha wrote back. Let her process. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people discover the truth on their own. Martha looked at Eleanor and Patricia, now excitedly discussing business ideas. Soon, they would be part of something bigger than revenge. They would be part of her legacy. A legacy built not on destroying Richard, but on empowering the very people he had underestimated. Starting with his future stepdaughter. Jennifer's classroom at the community college was filled with women over 60, all focused on their laptop screens. Martha sat in the back, watching Eleanor learn to set up her cookie business website. Remember, ladies, Jennifer said, your age is your advantage. People trust experience. Martha's phone buzzed. A message from her lawyer. 3 more properties transferred successfully. Richard hasn't noticed. Mrs. Sterling? Linda, Richard's secretary of 30 years, appeared at the classroom door. Mr. Sterling is looking for you. He's furious about the Westbrook Plaza sale. Martha checked her watch. Right on schedule. Back at Sterling Real Estate, Richard was pacing his office. Who authorized the sale of Westbrook Plaza? That property was worth millions. You did, dear. Martha handed him a document. See? Your signature. Richard stared at the paper. I never signed this. You signed it last month, remember? During that dinner when Sophia wore that red dress you bought her. Richard's face paled. How did you know about the dress? The same way I know about the house you bought her in Miami. Martha smiled. I know everything, Richard. Before he could respond, his assistant rushed in. Sir, Thompson Construction is pulling out of all projects. They say they received proof of unsafe building materials. What? That's impossible. Oh, and the Jensen account? They're leaving too. The assistant handed him a stack of resignation letters. Also, half the sales team quit this morning. Richard collapsed in his chair. This can't be happening. It's happening, Martha said quietly. Just like you planned James Bennett's downfall to happen. You don't know anything about Bennett. Martha played a recording on her phone, Richard's voice from 20 years ago, planning to frame James Bennett. Where did you get that? The same place I got everything else. You really should change your email password, dear. At that moment, Sophia burst in. Richard, we have a problem. Ashley's asking questions about my father. Not now, Sophia. Yes, now. She found old newspapers about Dad's trial. She knows what you did to him. Martha watched them argue, then slipped out. In the hallway, she met Jennifer. "How many women signed up?" Martha asked. 30 so far. Eleanor's cookies already have pre-orders. Patricia's caps are trending on social media." "Perfect. And the other thing," Jennifer pulled out old letters. "Found them in my attic. Every promise Richard made before he left me for you." "We'll need those later," Martha said, "for when he tries to challenge the will." That afternoon, Martha visited her lawyer. "Is everything ready? Properties transferred, documents filed, evidence secured?" He looked concerned. "But Martha, this goes beyond revenge. You're dismantling his entire empire." "Not dismantling, transforming. How many properties did we donate to the Women's Business Initiative? 5 office buildings and 3 retail spaces. Richard will explode when he finds out." "He'll do more than explode, he'll try to stop it." Martha handed him a USB drive. "That's why we have this." Later at the hospital, Grace updated Martha on another part of the plan. "Tommy asked about his father again," Grace said. "He's starting to suspect." "Does he know he saved Richard's life?" "No, but he's a doctor now. He has access to transplant records." Martha nodded. Perfect timing. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Ashley. "Is it true? Did Richard really destroy my grandfather?" Martha replied, "Ask your mother about Project Sunrise. Ask her why she really came back to Fairfield." That evening, Martha attended one final class at Jennifer's program. The women were sharing their business plans. Eleanor had orders from 3 restaurants. Patricia's caps were featured in a local fashion blog. Even Betty was starting a home organizing service. "You've given us our power back," Eleanor said. "No," Martha replied. "I just showed you where it was all along." On her way home, Martha got a final message from her lawyer. All transfers complete. No way to trace them. Richard's name isn't on anything anymore. Martha touched her pearls, the ones Sophia would soon wear, and smiled. Everything was in place. Tomorrow she would start her final round of treatment. In 3 months, she would be gone. But her revenge? That would live forever. And Richard? He was about to learn that the empire he built on lies would crumble on truth. Starting with his own son's sacrifice. The law office of Davidson and Partners fell silent as Martha's will was about to be read. Richard sat confidently, holding Sophia's hand. Betty stood in the corner, still wearing her housekeeper's uniform. Grace positioned herself by the door, clipboard in hand. "Before we begin," Mr. Davidson said, "Mrs. Sterling left specific instructions for this video to be played first." Richard frowned. "Video?" The screen lit up with Martha's face. She was wearing her pearls, the same ones now around Sophia's neck. "Hello, Richard. If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you've probably already moved Sophia into our home." Martha's recorded voice was steady. "But let's talk about home, shall we? And about empires built on lies." Richard's smile faded. "First," Martha continued, "the Sterling real estate empire. I've spent the last 6 months transferring properties out of the company. All legally. All with your signature. Remember those documents you signed while having dinner with Sophia?" Richard's face went white. 75% of our properties have been sold. The proceeds created the Martha Sterling Foundation for Women's Entrepreneurship. The remaining properties were donated to the foundation directly. "She can't do this." Richard jumped up. "Oh, but I did," Martha's recording continued. "Everything was in my name. You made sure of that to avoid taxes. Remember?" Sophia grabbed Richard's arm. "What is she talking about?" "Now, about those building code violations you covered up," Martha continued, "and the fraudulent loans, and poor James Bennett, Sophia's father, whom you framed for your own crimes." Sophia released Richard's hand. "All evidence has been secured with multiple law firms. If you challenge this will, everything goes to the authorities." Mr. Davidson paused the video. "Shall I continue?" Richard slumped in his chair. "What does she want?" "The foundation gets everything," Mr. Davidson said. "Except for 25% of the company, which you can keep under one condition. You must teach business classes at the foundation 30 hours per week for the next year." "Never. Then you get nothing, and the evidence goes public." The video resumed. Martha was smiling now. "One more thing, Richard. Remember your kidney transplant? Would you like to know who your donor was?" Grace stepped forward. "That would be my son, your son." Richard's jaw dropped. "What?" "The baby you paid me to take care of in 1982, Grace said. "He grew up to be a doctor. He saved your life, and you never knew. Sophia stood up. You had a son? Another secret? She ripped the pearls from her neck. What else don't I know? Ask him about Project Sunrise, Martha's voice suggested. Ask him what really happened to your father. Ashley burst into the room. I know what happened. I found the proof in Martha's study. Everything Richard did to destroy Grandpa. Ashley, wait, Sophia called after her daughter, who ran out crying. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. There's more. Mrs. Sterling left specific instructions about inheritance timing. Any future spouse of Mr. Sterling must wait 15 years before accessing any assets. Sophia grabbed her purse. 15 years? I'm not waiting 15 years. She headed for the door. This isn't what we planned, Richard. Call me when you figure this out. Sophia, please, Richard begged. One last thing, Martha's recording said. Betty, could you give my pearls to Grace? She'll need them for her new position as foundation director. Richard watched helplessly as Grace put on Martha's pearls. Oh, and Richard? Martha's final words hung in the air. Remember when you said you never loved me like you loved Sophia? You were right. I loved you enough to build an empire. You loved me so little, you couldn't even wait until my funeral to replace me. The video ended. Richard sat alone, surrounded by the ruins of his empire. The Foundation's first classes start next week, Grace announced. Don't be late, Richard. Your students will be waiting. As everyone left, Betty placed an envelope on the table. Mrs. Sterling wanted you to have this last message privately. Richard opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single photo, him and Martha on their first day in business, young and in love. On the back, Martha had written, "The biggest mistake in real estate isn't location, Richard. It's thinking you own something that was never really yours." Richard looked up to find himself alone in the conference room, surrounded by papers detailing everything he had lost, everything he had thrown away. For nothing. 3 weeks after the will reading, Richard sat alone in his office, staring at his phone. Sophia hadn't returned his calls. The email from Miami told him everything. She was dating Tom Reynolds, his biggest competitor. Your first class starts in 20 minutes, Grace announced from the doorway. She wore Martha's pearls with quiet confidence. The foundation won't run itself. I'm not teaching anyone anything. Then the evidence goes to the FBI. Grace placed a folder on his desk. Your choice. The classroom was full of women over 60. Eleanor sat in front, her cookie business website already open on her laptop. Patricia arranged her knitting samples on the desk. Welcome to Business Marketing 101, Richard muttered. Speak up, called a voice from the back. Some of us lost our hearing laughing at men like you. The class laughed. Richard recognized the speaker, Dorothy Chen, a woman he'd evicted last year from one of his properties. His phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer, FBI asking questions about Project Sunrise. Someone sent them documents. Another message popped up from an unknown number. Dad, we need to talk. Tommy. Richard's hands shook. He looked up to find Grace watching him. He figured it out on his own, she said. Checked the transplant records at the hospital. Does he know everything? About you paying me to disappear? Yes. Grace stepped closer. About how you threatened to destroy my nursing career if I ever told anyone? He knows that too. The classroom door opened. Tommy walked in. Tall, confident, wearing a doctor's coat. Richard saw his own eyes looking back at him. Class dismissed, Grace announced. Except you, Richard. You need to hear this. As the students filed out, Tommy sat down. So, you're the man who abandoned my mother. I was young, I made mistakes. Save it. Tommy pulled out hospital records. I'm also the man who saved your life. Match was almost perfect, wasn't it? Funny how genetics work. Tommy, I can explain. Explain what? How you made my mother disappear? Or how you never once asked about your son in 40 years? Grace stood by the door, watching. I have a trust fund, Richard offered. I can make this right. Make it right? Tommy laughed. Martha already did that. She left me controlling interest in the medical center you're building, the one you cut corners on. Richard's phone buzzed again. His lawyer, SEC investigating offshore accounts. Martha's evidence is overwhelming. She planned everything, Richard whispered. Yes, she did. Grace stepped forward. Martha made sure Tommy would control the medical center. She made sure I'd run the foundation, and she made sure you'd lose everything that mattered. I still have 25% of the company, Richard said desperately. About that, Tommy pulled out more papers. Those building code violations you covered up? They're my responsibility now as chief of staff. I have to report them. You wouldn't. Watch me. Tommy stood. You know what's interesting? When I donated my kidney, I thought I was helping a stranger. Turns out I was saving the man who threw my mother away like trash. Richard's phone kept buzzing. Messages from his lawyers, the FBI, the SEC. His empire was crumbling. One more thing, Tommy said at the door. Ashley came to see me at the hospital. She needed someone to talk to about fathers who disappoint their children. We're having dinner tonight. Your daughter and your son. Isn't karma interesting? After they left, Richard opened his email. Sophia had sent a photo, she and Tom Reynolds on his yacht in Miami. Thanks for the introduction, she wrote. Tom's properties are all legitimate, unlike yours. Richard reached for the bottom drawer, where he used to keep his whiskey. Instead, he found a note in Martha's handwriting. The worst prison isn't built with bars, Richard. It's built with consequences. His phone buzzed one final time. The message was simple. Mr. Sterling, this is the FBI. We need to talk about Project Sunrise. Richard looked out his office window at the foundation building next door. Through the window, he could see his former clients, now students, learning to build their own dreams. Dreams that would rise from the ashes of his lies. And he had no choice but to watch it happen. One lesson at a time. 2 months into teaching at the foundation, Richard noticed something changing. His students weren't just learning, they were succeeding. Eleanor's cookies now sold in 5 states. Patricia's knitting patterns had gone viral on social media. Even Betty's home organizing business had a waiting list. Today we'll discuss online marketing, Richard announced to the class, no longer needing Grace's reminders to speak up. Dorothy Chen raised her hand. Like Martha did with her secret website, Richard froze. What website? The one where she documented everything. Dorothy opened her laptop. She created it the day she found out about Sophia. The class fell silent as Dorothy turned her screen around. There it was, a detailed timeline of Richard's betrayals, dating back 40 years. Martha was my best friend in college, Dorothy revealed, before you stole her from her fiancé. Remember him, James Bennett? Richard sat down hard. Martha was engaged to Sophia's father? Now he gets it. Dorothy smiled. James loved Martha, but you offered her a bigger dream. Then you destroyed James when he threatened to expose your schemes. That's why Sophia came back, Richard whispered. She's James's revenge. No, Richard, she's Martha's justice. After class, Richard found Grace waiting. Time for your meeting with Tommy. The hospital cafeteria was quiet. Tommy sat with Ashley, both looking at old photographs. Dad used to take me here, Ashley said, before he disappeared, before Mom married that rich guy in Miami. My mom worked double shifts here, Tommy replied. Single mother, raising a doctor. Richard approached their table. Tommy, Ashley. Richard, they said together, neither using Dad. I've been thinking, Richard said, about making things right. Little late for that, Tommy answered. Maybe not. Richard pulled out papers. I'm signing over my remaining shares of the company, half to each of you. Ashley looked up. Why? Because Martha was right. About everything. Richard's voice cracked. I spent my life building an empire of lies. Maybe you too can build something better. Like what? Tommy asked. Like turning that medical center into something that actually helps people. No corner cutting, no lies. And what about you? Ashley demanded. I'll keep teaching. These women, they remind me of Martha when we started. Determined, smart, better than me. Dorothy appeared at their table. Speaking of Martha, there's something you should know. She handed Richard an old engagement photo. Martha and James Bennett, young and smiling. The day you met Martha, Dorothy said, she was buying her wedding dress. James had saved for years to start their real estate company. Then you offered her a partnership instead. I didn't know, Richard whispered. You never asked. Just like you never asked about Tommy, or why Sophia really came back, or why Martha kept every receipt, every document, every proof of your lies for 40 years. But why show me this now? Dorothy smiled Martha's knowing smile. Because tomorrow's lesson is about karma, and you're the case study. That evening, Richard worked late at the foundation. A new student approached his desk, an elderly woman he didn't recognize. Can I help you? Actually, I'm here to help you. She sat down. I'm James Bennett's mother. Martha asked me to give you this after she died." She handed him a letter. Inside, he found the original partnership agreement he'd signed with Martha, dated 1975. On it, Martha had written, "The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone's dreams, Richard. It's showing them how it feels to watch others build their dreams on the ruins of yours." Richard looked up, but James's mother was gone. Through the window, he could see his students, women he once would have dismissed, building their own empires, not with lies like he had, but with the truth Martha had taught them. And for the first time, Richard Sterling felt truly poor. The foundation's success exceeded even Martha's plans. 6 months after its opening, Eleanor's Cookie Company landed a contract with a national grocery chain. Patricia's knitting patterns earned her a segment on a morning show. The waiting list for classes grew to over 300 women. Richard watched it all from his small office, formerly the mansion's gardener's shed. "Your 9 o'clock is here," Grace announced. Sophia walked in, noticeably less confident than before. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple business wear. "Richard, we need to talk." "About what? Tom Reynolds throwing you out after he lost everything in Miami?" Sophia sat down. "I deserve that. But I'm not here for money." "Then why?" "Because Martha knew this would happen. She pulled out an envelope. She left this with her lawyer, said to give it to me when I had nothing left." Richard leaned forward. "What does it say?" "It's a job offer, teaching marketing at the foundation." Sophia's hands trembled. She knew I'd fail in Miami, knew I'd come back. "And you want the job?" "I want to make things right, with Ashley, with my father's memory." Before Richard could respond, Ashley and Tommy appeared at the door. "Mom?" Ashley hadn't spoken to Sophia in months. "Hi, sweetie. I was just trying to manipulate someone else?" Ashley crossed her arms. "No, I'm here about Martha's letter." Tommy stepped forward. "The one about teaching marketing?" Sophia looked surprised. "You knew?" "Martha left letters for everyone," Grace said from the doorway. "Each one exactly timed for when we'd need them most." Richard opened his desk drawer, pulling out his own collection of Martha's letters. Each had arrived exactly when he was at his lowest. "Did you read today's?" Grace asked. Richard shook his head, opening the envelope marked, "When Sophia returns." Martha's words were clear. "True power isn't in destroying people, Richard. It's in giving them a chance to rebuild themselves, just like I'm giving you." The door opened again. Jennifer Thompson walked in. "Your new marketing team is ready," she announced. They followed her to the classroom. Inside, 20 women waited, all former victims of Richard's business schemes. "Meet your new students," Jennifer said to Sophia. Each one lost something to Sterling Real Estate. Now they're here to learn how to build something new. Sophia faced the women. "I'm not who you think." "We know exactly who you are," one woman interrupted. "Martha told us about your father, about your plan for revenge, about everything." "Then why would you want me to teach you?" "Because Martha believed in second chances," Jennifer replied, "even for those who don't deserve them." Richard watched as Sophia began to cry. Real tears this time, not the manipulative ones he'd seen so often before. Ashley moved closer to her mother. "Dad's teaching here too. Maybe we could all learn something." Tommy placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. "Martha's last letter to me said something important. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about creating a better future." Grace touched her pearls, Martha's pearls. "The foundation's 1-year anniversary is next week. Martha left special instructions for that day, too." "What instructions?" Richard asked. "You'll see." Grace smiled. She saved her biggest surprise for last. As the class began, Richard watched Sophia attempt to connect with her students. She was failing, but she was trying. Just like he had. His phone buzzed. A message from James Bennett's mother. "Martha's final video will play at the anniversary ceremony. Are you ready for her last lesson?" Richard looked around the room, at his son, his almost daughter, his former mistress, all the lives he'd broken, and all the people trying to rebuild. "No," he typed back, "but I don't think I'm supposed to be." The old woman's reply was instant. "Martha said you'd say that. She also said that's how she knew her plan would work." Richard touched his own letter from Martha, still unopened. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in the punishment, it's in the redemption. And Martha Sterling had planned both. On the morning before the foundation's anniversary, Grace found Richard staring at Martha's pearls in their display case. "Do you know the real story behind these pearls?" Grace asked. "I gave them to her when we bought our first office." "No, Richard, that's your story, not hers." Grace unlocked the display case and removed the necklace. Under the pearl's clasp, she revealed a tiny USB drive. Martha never wore these pearls just for show. They were her insurance policy. Every conversation, every deal, every lie, all recorded here. Richard sank into a chair. All this time. But that's not the biggest secret. Grace pressed the largest pearl. It clicked open, revealing a microchip. "This contains everything about Project Sunrise, your offshore accounts, the real reason James Bennett went to prison." "Why show me this now?" "Because Martha's final video plays tomorrow. You deserve to know what's coming." The door opened. Jennifer walked in with a stack of old letters. "Found these in my attic," she said. "Every promise you made before leaving me for Martha. She asked me to keep them until today." Richard took the letters. "I was different then." "Were you?" Jennifer placed Martha's diary on the desk. Read page 43. Richard opened the diary. "Today Richard proposed. He doesn't know I heard him promise the same things to Jennifer last month, but I accept it anyway. Someone needs to stop him from hurting more women, even if it takes 40 years. She married me knowing I was lying?" "She married you to protect others from you," Jennifer corrected. "Everything, the foundation, the classes, the evidence. She planned it all on our first date." Betty entered carrying a photo album. "Mrs. Sterling wanted you to see these today." The album contained photos of every person Richard had wronged. James Bennett, Jennifer, Grace, all the families he'd evicted, all the partners he'd betrayed. "Martha kept track of everyone," Betty explained. "She helped them secretly for years, paid for Grace's nursing school, funded Jennifer's teaching degree, supported James Bennett's mother after he went to prison." Tommy and Ashley arrived next, carrying boxes of documents. "Found these at Mom's place in Miami," Ashley said. "Sophia kept records too, not just of your lies, of her own." Tommy opened a file. Turns out Sophia was working with Martha for the past year. Every record, every confession, all part of the plan. "Martha reached out to me 6 months before she died," Sophia said from the doorway. "Showed me proof that you framed my father. Offered me a choice, help expose you or go down with you." Richard looked around the room. "You were all part of this?" "Martha brought us together." Grace said. "Everyone you hurt, everyone you betrayed, she gave us all a choice, revenge or redemption." "Which did you choose?" "Look around, Richard." Grace gestured at the foundation. "What do you think?" Richard's phone buzzed. A message from James Bennett's mother. "Ready for tomorrow's video? Martha saved her biggest truth for last." Another message arrived, from Martha's old email account, scheduled months ago. "The pearls weren't just jewelry, Richard. They were a key. Tomorrow, they unlock everything." Dorothy entered last, carrying a final letter. "Martha wrote this the day she died," Dorothy said. "It explains why she forgave you, why she chose redemption over destruction." Richard opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Richard, I could have destroyed you with a single pearl's worth of evidence. Instead, I built something better from your lies. Tomorrow, you'll understand why. The pearls you gave me thinking they were a chain became the key to everyone's freedom, including yours. Love always, Martha." Grace placed the pearls back in their case. Tomorrow, during Martha's video, these pearls tell their final story. "What story?" "The one about a woman who turned 40 years of lies into a lifetime of truth," Grace smiled. "Martha's last lesson starts in 12 hours. Are you ready to learn?" Richard looked at the faces around him. All people he'd wronged. All transformed by Martha's plan. Tomorrow, her final video would play. Tomorrow, the pearls would reveal their last secret. Tomorrow, Richard Sterling would learn Martha's greatest lesson. And for the first time in 40 years, he was afraid of the truth. The Foundation's auditorium was packed for the 1-year anniversary celebration. 100 successful graduates sat in the front rows. Eleanor's cookies were served at every table. Patricia's knitted scarves decorated each chair. Richard sat in the back, watching Grace approach the podium wearing Martha's pearls. "Welcome to our first graduation ceremony," Grace began. "But before we celebrate our graduates, Martha left us a final message." The lights dimmed. Martha's face appeared on the screen, vibrant and smiling, recorded just days before her death. Hello, my dear students, Martha began. If you're watching this, our foundation has succeeded beyond my hopes. But there's one final lesson to learn. About love, about forgiveness, about the true meaning of legacy. The screen split to show surveillance footage. Richard bringing Sophia home after the funeral, wearing Martha's pearls. Richard, dear, I knew about Sophia long before you thought I did, just like I knew about every betrayal, every lie, every scheme. The pearls you gave me recorded everything. The audience gasped as Grace removed the necklace, revealing its hidden technology. But here's what you never knew, Martha continued. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it for love, not just love for you, but for every person you hurt. For James Bennett, who loved me first. For Jennifer, who you abandoned. For Grace and Tommy, who you denied. For all the families you displaced. The screen showed images of the Foundation's graduates launching their businesses, supporting their families, rebuilding their lives. This foundation isn't just about teaching business. It's about turning pain into purpose. Your lies became their lessons. Your betrayals became their beginnings. Martha's face softened. And now my final surprise. Grace, would you open the pearl? Grace twisted the center pearl. Inside was a small key. In the mansion's basement, Martha continued, behind the old wine rack, there's a safe. This key opens it. Tommy and Ashley rushed to retrieve its contents. They returned carrying a stack of documents. These papers prove James Bennett's innocence, Martha explained. They also protect everyone in this room from any legal repercussions for their part in my plan. The FBI has copies. Your empire wasn't just transferred, Richard. It was transformed. Legally, permanently, completely. The screen split again, showing the Foundation's success stories. Eleanor's cookies are now in stores nationwide. Patricia's designs are featured in fashion magazines. Every woman in this room has built something beautiful from the ashes of your deceptions. Martha's eyes filled with tears. But my greatest hope wasn't their success. It was your redemption, Richard. These past months, teaching here, you've changed. You've learned, you've grown. The screen showed clips of Richard teaching, genuinely helping his students. So here's your graduation present. Forgiveness. Not just from me, but from everyone you've wronged. They each made that choice themselves, inspired by what we've built here. The audience stood. One by one, led by Grace, they turned to face Richard. We forgive you, they said in unison. Martha's voice continued. The pearls are yours now, Richard. Not as a reminder of your lies, but as a symbol of your transformation. Grace will give them to you after this video. They no longer contain evidence, just the power to record new truths. Richard wiped his eyes as Grace approached with the necklace. And one last thing, Martha said. James Bennett is here today. The back door opened. James Bennett, older but standing tall, walked in. Hello, Richard, he said. Martha asked me to come, said something about closing circles and opening hearts. Martha's final words filled the room. Love isn't about possession, Richard. It's about purpose. I loved you enough to stop you from hurting others, loved you enough to help you change, and loved you enough to show you that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we give away. The screen went dark. In the silence, Richard stood holding Martha's pearls. I don't deserve these, he said. No, Grace replied, but you've earned the chance to become someone who does. The graduates applauded as Richard walked to the podium, pearls in hand. His redemption story was just beginning, and Martha's legacy would ensure he got it right this time. 1 year after Martha's final video, the Sterling Mansion transformed into something she never could have imagined. The grand entrance hall, once a testament to Richard's ego, now hosted a bustling community center. Eleanor's Cookie Company occupied the former ballroom, filling the air with the scent of fresh-baked dreams. Patricia's knitting workshop took over the sunroom, where women learned to turn crafts into profits. Richard lived in the gardener's cottage, teaching daily classes in the same rooms where he once plotted his schemes. His greatest joy came from watching his students succeed, particularly Dorothy Chen, who turned her eviction story into a housing advocacy program that helped hundreds of families. Your 9 o'clock is waiting, Grace announced one morning. Richard looked up to find James Bennett in his doorway. Thought we should talk, James said. About Martha. About everything. They walked through the Foundation's halls, watching women learn, grow, and build their futures. She loved you first, Richard said. No, James replied. She loved what you could become. Even back then, she saw something in you worth saving. They reached Martha's garden, now maintained by a graduate who'd turned her landscaping hobby into a thriving business. Sophia's doing well, James mentioned. Her marketing classes are the most popular in the program. Richard nodded. After Martha's video, Sophia had dedicated herself to the foundation, working to restore her father's name and rebuild her relationship with Ashley. Tommy appeared in the garden, wearing his doctor's coat. The medical center he ran with Ashley had become a model of ethical healthcare. Dad, he called to Richard, the first time he'd used that word. We need your help with the new housing project. The project was Richard's idea, affordable homes for seniors starting their own businesses. They'd broken ground last month on land that used to house one of his most notorious development schemes. First residents move in next week, Tommy continued. Thought you might want to help welcome them. Inside, the mansion buzzed with activity. Betty's organizing business had expanded to help other women declutter their lives and start fresh. She'd written a book about it, dedicated to Martha. Grace still wore the pearls, but they held new meaning now. Each pearl represented a woman who'd graduated from the program and started her own business. They'd added 3 strands so far. Special Delivery, called Eleanor, bringing in boxes of cookies. Her company now employed 15 other foundation graduates. These are for the anniversary celebration. The foundation's second anniversary celebration would be different from the first. No more secrets to reveal, no more pain to transform, just success stories to share and new dreams to build. Ashley burst in, excited. Mom's group just landed their first major client. Sophia had started a support group for daughters of difficult fathers, turning her own journey into healing for others. The group now partnered with Tommy's medical center, providing counseling and career guidance. Martha would have loved this, Richard said, watching the activity around him. She does love it, Grace corrected. Everything here breathes her vision. The mail arrived, including a letter addressed to Richard in Martha's handwriting, the last one she'd arranged to be delivered. Dear Richard, it read, by now you've learned that true wealth isn't in buildings or bank accounts. It's in the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. You lost an empire of lies, but gained a legacy of truth. That's the real American dream. Not just success, but significance. Keep teaching, keep growing, keep proving that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. All my love, Martha. That evening, during the anniversary celebration, Richard stood at the podium wearing Martha's pearls, now a symbol not of his shame, but of his transformation. 1 year ago, he began, we watched Martha's final video. We thought it was the end of her story. We were wrong. It was just the beginning. The audience, graduates, students, family members filled every seat. Martha didn't just build a foundation, Richard continued. She built a future, not just for you, but for me. She taught me that true power isn't in taking, but in giving. Not in destroying dreams, but in helping them grow. James Bennett stood beside him, their old enmity transformed into shared purpose. Tommy and Ashley sat together, their unlikely sibling bond a testament to Martha's vision of healing. Sophia watched from the back, her marketing students surrounding her with love she'd never expected to deserve. Today, we're launching the Martha Sterling Scholarship, Richard announced. Funded by the sale of my remaining properties. Every year, it will help 50 women over 60 start their own businesses. Grace joined him at the podium, her pearls gleaming. And we're expanding. 5 new locations across the country. Martha's legacy is going national. The celebration continued into the evening. Eleanor's cookies were served on plates painted by another graduate. Patricia's scarves wrapped around shoulders that stood straighter now, prouder. Betty organized the event with her trademark efficiency. Her best-selling book displayed at every table. In the garden, under the stars, Richard sat on Martha's favorite bench. The medical center gleamed in the distance, its ethical practices a stark contrast to his former methods. The new housing project rose beyond it, each home a promise of fresh starts. You did good, Martha, he whispered. You turned a man who destroyed dreams into someone who helps build them. A shooting star streaked across the sky. Richard touched the pearls around his neck, no longer a chain of evidence, but a rosary of redemption. Inside, the mansion hummed with possibility. Women who society had overlooked were building empires of their own, not of glass and steel, but of courage and hope. Martha's garden bloomed with roses she'd planted, their fragrance carrying her final lesson on the evening breeze. True love transforms, true power liberates, and true wealth multiplies when shared. The American dream hadn't died with Martha Sterling. She'd just reinvented it, one pearl of wisdom at a time. And in the end, that was her greatest revenge of all. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for a fresh start. Drop a comment below, sharing what Martha's legacy means to you. What would you do with a second chance? Remember to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that prove the American dream isn't just about success, it's about significance. And as Martha Sterling would say, true wealth isn't in what we own, but in the lives we transform along the way.